Let me ask Mr. Holtzekin a question about Chair Waters' Down Payment Towards Equity Act, which would spend $100 billion, essentially no strings attached checks of $25,000 that potential homebuyers could use towards a down payment on a home. Let's analyze the effects that this would have on a macro level. Would legislation like this contribute to home price inflation?
Yes.
Let's talk about it in combination with Fed policy right now, the tightening program that the Fed is engaged in. As the Fed is actively trying to tamp down soaring home prices by increasing interest rates to reduce demand, would legislation like the chair's work directly against the Fed's goal of reducing demand?
Yes, and most likely what would happen is the Fed would be more aggressive. Overall home purchases would be continue to decline because that's what the necessary objective for them. This might change the composition of who gets the house.
So demand-side subsidies would actually increase the likelihood that the Fed would have to be even more aggressive in raising interest rates and borrowing costs.
Yes, absolutely.
My question to you is that in addition to housing assistance that you're asking for, would it be helpful to also have an advocate for you, someone that you can talk to in addition to housing and help you with job counseling, financial literacy programming for you and your family? Would it be helpful if you also had some additional services that could connect you with other services in addition to the housing assistance?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Barr. Anything that will be an asset for us to be able to come back into the community to make sure that we are, I'm sorry, I'm just losing my train of thought. Make sure that we can succeed in this. Of course, we want an advocate to be able to help us with our financials and job, descriptions or anything to do with that. Of course, we need advocates to speak up for us and teach us how to be literate with our finances and everything. Anything that will help us be an asset to the community.
And you are an asset to the community, and I can see that. And I'm not saying this applies to you, but others who have difficulty with homelessness or are living in their vehicles and not having a home, some of them have substance abuse challenges or mental illness issues. Not saying that applies to you, but do you think it would be helpful for them to, in addition to have housing, connect them with the mental health services or the substance abuse counseling? Would that be helpful to them?
Yes, it would be.
Great. Let me ask Mr. Holtzekin a question about Chair Waters' Down Payment Towards Equity Act, which would spend $100 billion, essentially no strings attached checks of $25,000 that potential homebuyers could use towards a down payment on a home. Let's analyze the effects that this would have on a macro level. Would legislation like this contribute to home price inflation?
Yes.
Let's talk about it in combination with Fed policy right now, the tightening program that the Fed is engaged in. As the Fed is actively trying to tamp down soaring home prices by increasing interest rates to reduce demand, would legislation like the chair's work directly against the Fed's goal of reducing demand?
Yes, and most likely what would happen is the Fed would be more aggressive. Overall home purchases would be continue to decline because that's what the necessary objective for them. This might change the composition of who gets the house.
So demand-side subsidies would actually increase the likelihood that the Fed would have to be even more aggressive in raising interest rates and borrowing costs.
Yes, absolutely.
And would legislation like this result in a greater supply of housing or simply more demand for the same limited resource?
The latter. It's not a supply-targeted policy.
So while maybe not as flashy as handing out $25,000 taxpayer-funded checks so wealthy individuals could buy million-dollar homes, what are some of the serious proposals that Congress should be considering to actually increase our housing supply and address this affordability issue?
As I mentioned earlier, the tax incentives to increase construction, I think, make sense over the long term. You want to have a predictable, reliable, environment that provides supply at a lower cost. So lightening the regulatory burdens at the local level, if you have a way to influence that, do it. There are tariff policies in place from the federal government that are raising the cost of construction and construction goods. That would be a sensible thing that could be reduced. And, you know, the low-income housing tax credit's not perfect, but it's a thing.
Yeah, and to your point, and in my remaining time, I'll just point out a 2021 study by the National Association of Home Builders found that basic regulatory costs add $93,800 to the price of a new home. Do you support federal efforts to remove some of that regulatory burden to amplify the supply?
I think that's a sensible idea. I don't know how you can do it, and so I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Okay. My time has expired. I yield back.
I'd like to thank you for your presence.
Chairwoman Waters,
And for the time.
parliamentary inquiry.
Yes.
Are all members entitled to question witnesses?
You are, and if you would like to miss the votes on the floor for everybody.
Hey, it's
just
the
one
chairwoman's
moment.
prerogative to call a
Just
recess.
one moment,
That's your
please.
decision, not mine.
Just one moment, please. You may go right ahead and have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're certainly welcome, sir.
Mr. Ray, earlier today you said FTX was one of the worst bankruptcies you have handled in your 40 years of legal and restructuring experience. Under Mr. Bankman-Fried, FTX had almost no record keeping, risk management, or accounting. In fact, FTX had 0 accountants on their payroll. Mr. Bankman-Fried explained to Bloomberg Businessweek that FTX's accounting was done by him, and in his head, quote, "I was real lazy about the mental math. The complete lack of any basic record keeping makes it difficult to track down assets and untangle this mess." Are you aware of any additional wallets the co-founders potentially have access to that contain debtor assets?
No, we're not.
There's also been very little attention to the banks that FTX had a relationship with. I don't know that I've heard about any questions today, but the ties between FTX and Farmington State Bank began in March when Alameda Research invested $11.5 million in the bank's parent company, FBH. Do you have any insight or additional information as to why a small agricultural lending bank with really no footprint in fintech or crypto has a relationship with FTX?
No, that's the subject of our inquiry. I mean, we do know, obviously, we made that investment.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You've also stated that Alameda's business model as a market maker required deploying funds to various third-party exchanges, which were inherently unsafe and further exacerbated by the limited protections offered in certain foreign jurisdictions. To your knowledge, are any of the FTX co-founder or their family members affiliated with third-party exchanges that received funds from Alameda?
We're certainly investigating that. It's going to take some time to dig through that, but that's clearly a part of our focus.
Thank you.
Point of order, down here. Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Donalds for
a point
5
of
minutes.
order,
You'll
Mr.
have
Chairman.
5 minutes.
It's
You'll
not
have
my
all
5
the
minutes.
time
A
in
point
the
of
world.
order
No, you're
is
out of
not within
order.
5
You're
minutes.
out of order, Mr. Goldman.
I have a
when
point
you're
of order.
when your time is,
I
you will
asked
be
to
recognized.
introduce
Chair
something by
recognizes
unanimous
Mr. Donalds
consent.
for 5 minutes.
Is it being introduced?
Chair recognizes Mr. Donalds for 5 minutes. Byron, it's your
Chairman,
time.
the rules require you
Thank
to
you,
recognize
Mr. Chairman.
me.
No.
Yes, for a point of order, they absolutely do.
Chair
And you have
recognizes
to rule
Mr.
on
Donalds.
the motion.
And as
You've
Mr.
already
Donald's
made
time
2
ticking
points
too?
of order.
No,
Chair
Mr. Donald's
recognizes
time
Mr.
is not going
Donalds.
to take. Actually, Mr. Chairman, I request his clock be set back to 5 minutes
Set
so we
the
can.
clock back to 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make a parliamentary inquiry then? Are we not to make points of order on either side during
You
the
keep
questioning?
speaking about no evidence. Why don't you all just listen and
I'm trying to
learn?
introduce evidence.
You've already introduced. You've already had your
Is it in?
share of evidence.
Are you
Now,
admitting
Mr. Donalds, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dubinsky, I want to come to you quickly. A lot of talk about evidence. On the screens in the room, we have an organizational chart from the IRS investigative team that was looking into the business practices of Hunter Biden and his associates. This org chart is from 2014. Now, Mr. Dubinsky, when my former life, I was in community banking, and I'm comfortable with looking at organizational charts. When I first saw this chart, the first thing I thought about was a real estate holding company or a developer, and this is not to demean developers in the great east state of America, but developers typically have multiple companies that float with various business interests and business lines. But the funny thing is that in the business dealings of Hunter Biden, there is no real estate, none at all. So, Mr. Dubinsky, in your professional experience, looking at this organizational chart of business structure, what do you see here?
I see a very complicated structure of entities that are interrelated and would give me concern. If I were an investigator, I would want to know what's going on in these entities, who's behind them, how's the money moving between them, and what is the substance of the transactions? What's really going on here?
Mr. Dubinsky, do you think it's in the interest of this committee that is now in an inquiry phase to actually find out all of the flow of money between these entities and what the purpose was?
Absolutely.
Next slide, please. For my colleagues on the other side, we're going to start talking evidence now. This is now a slide of the organizational chart of the Hunter Biden business companies and with associates from 2018, from the same IRS investigators who were broke down the business structure in 2014. Does this slide cause you the same concern, Mr. Dubinsky?
Yes, it does.
Okay, now let's talk about some more. Actually, one point I want to make on this. Ladies and gentlemen, and I know it's kind of small, so I would love to I will submit all this for the record. I would love my colleagues on the other side to see this. In 2014, one of the key owners was Devin Archer, who did testify and was under deposition under oath by the Oversight Committee. In 2018, Devin Archer is no longer listed, but his wife, Krista Archer, is now listed. Mr. Dubinsky, when you see a situation where ownership interest moves from one spouse to the other, is that a concern of some level of fraud potentially?
I would call it a red flag. That's something I would look at and again, try to get to the bottom of what happened there. Was it just transferred? Was there money behind it? What was going on? Okay,
thank you. Next slide. Now, this is to a text message. This is a text message between, it's going to Naomi Biden. That's what this one is. Hold on, wait, so let me get my stuff back. There we go. Sorry. This is the WhatsApp text message between Jim Biden and Hunter Biden. In this text message, it clearly says, anyway, we can talk later, but you've been drawn into something purely for the purpose of protecting Dad. This is between Hunter Biden and Jim Biden. Last time I checked, the father of Jim Biden and Joe Biden is now passed away. So I'm assuming this is Hunter Biden saying to Jim Biden, the president's brother, that you've been brought in this for the sole purpose of protecting Dad. Ms. O'Connor, do you think that this text message would lead this committee to get further information about the business dealings of Hunter Biden and how that actually links to Jim Biden, the president's brother, and why they are so concerned with protecting Dad, AKA Joe Biden, AKA the President of the United States?
Yes.
Thank you. Next slide, please. This is a text message between Hunter Biden and Naomi Biden. And this one is a famous one. Everybody knows this one. This is a famous one that says, I hope you all do what I did and pay for everything for this entire family for 30 years. It's really hard. But don't worry, unlike Pop, I won't make you give me half your salary. Mr. Dubinsky, if you saw a text message like this in a potential money laundering operation or a potential pay-for-play operation, would you be looking for information related to money going from son to father?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Thank you. Next slide. Oh, this is a fun one. Ladies and gentlemen, this one is from 2018. This is about 4 months before Joe Biden launched his campaign for president of the United States, December 2018. The highlight is, this is a text message between Jim Biden and Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden was in a bad way, by the way. He was really strung out. He lost a bunch of money. He needed help. Jim Biden says, this can work. You need a safe harbor. I can work with your father alone. It'll probably take several months and everybody can read the text. Ms. O'Connor, Mr. Dubinsky, if you saw a text message like this between the president's brother and the president's son, wouldn't you be concerned about them trying to give plausible deniability for the president of the United States to not have any knowledge of said business dealings?
It's worth.
Gentleman's time's expired, but please answer the question.
It's worth investigating.
Mr. Dubinsky?
I would agree. I would investigate this.
I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.